Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to another webinar in the collaboration between CRDC and the Canadian Data Center Network, Research Data Center Network, and the journal Canadian Public Policy. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited about today's topic and the presentations. Before I hand it over to Mike Veal, I'm just going to be noting that in the chat, my colleague Ryan is going to be putting a couple of links for in case you want to be listening to this presentation in a different language. So you can click on those links and basically get the translation process started. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our principal investigator for the network, as well as the editor for the journal Canadian Public Policy, Dr. Mike Veal. Mike, all yours.
Thanks very much, Perry. So before we begin, many of us come on lands of the First Nations, and McMaster University of course, is one of those, and we acknowledge that we meet on the lands, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, nations, within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. As Perry said, these are two papers that we're going to be talking about today that were published in the journal Canadian Public Policy, Analyse de Politiques, in the September issue, so they're the latest issue papers. I won't give long introductions to our speakers. I will note that Pierre Fortin will be speaking later, and we will begin with Eman Almehdawe, who's the Associate Dean Research and Graduate Programs, and also an Associate Professor of Operations Management at the University of Regina. And she will be speaking also in collaboration with Megan Salter, who's a policy analyst, Government of Saskatchewan. So they will begin, and then Pierre Fortin, approximately 2 o'clock. Please go ahead, Eman.
Megan is going to start, so I will leave it to Megan to start the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Michael Veal, for the invitation, and we look forward to your feedback on this work. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So again, my name is Megan Salter, and I'm a policy analyst with the Government of Saskatchewan, and I'm happy to be here to present our project. I'll let you read the name. It's a bit long. It's on the screen there. And this project was undertaken for my Master's of Business Administration degree through the University of Regina. So we'll dive right in. So this work examines the association of post-secondary credentials and fields of study on the earnings of recent university graduates, as well as their potential to become propensity to become entrepreneurs. We linked 2 administrative databases from Statistics Canada together to enable analysis of students' transition from post-secondary education into the labor market and into self-employment. The study contributes to entrepreneurship research by looking at which factors contribute to a higher propensity to enter entrepreneurship, other words, higher likelihood or higher probability to become an entrepreneur, as well as how those post-secondary choices affect the incomes of recent Canadian graduates who do become self-employed. This understanding is important. It can help inform incentive and support policies, as well as help to evaluate the impact of government investments, as well as guiding individuals who are making labor market decisions. So just a quick bit of background before we jump in. Past research has used self-employment to proxy the available stock of entrepreneurs in the economy. A self-employed person can choose to incorporate their business, which creates a legal corporation which is separate from its owner and allows that corporation to conduct independent activities like borrowing money or entering into agreements. Alternatively, a self-employed person may choose not to incorporate or remain unincorporated. And in that case, the owner is legally responsible for all agreements, taxes, and assets of the business. And in that situation, a sole proprietor would claim all of their business income on their personal income taxes. So this study, we focus on incorporated businesses because that is the data set that we had access to. As well, some may classify all self-employed people as entrepreneurs, although there is a smaller body of research that solely looks at unincorporated business to indicate entrepreneurship, as this subsector is largely comprised of individuals who may be experimenting with running a brand new business. So just a few quick things to point out in existing literature. Education is one of the key strategies currently used to develop entrepreneurship. Although education attainment alone has not been found to be positively related to self-employment, because people may choose self-employment for both positive or negative reasons, and they might not be related to educational attainment. Results from meta-analysis show that in a large majority of the studies, educational attainment has an insignificant impact on the choice to become an entrepreneur. Although there is strong evidence that education is beneficial in terms of entrepreneurial performance, with meta-analysis showing that the marginal effect of an additional year of school on performance is significantly positive in over 80% of studies that used earnings as a performance measure, and in about 2/3 of studies that used other performance measures. Relating to the choice of entrepreneurship, several studies suggest a U-shaped relationship where those at the higher end of education and the lower end of the education spectrum would be more likely to become an entrepreneur. Although we don't find that to be the case, and I will go into that in later slides. But we do want to acknowledge that entrepreneurs also enjoy many non-pecuniary or non-monetary related benefits in their choice to become an entrepreneur. And survey results actually generally show that self-employed people have higher levels of job satisfaction compared to employees, and that's consistent across education levels and genders. So just acknowledging that definitions of success is subjective, although earnings are a global indicator of success, which is easily quantifiable. So many studies have used that to measure the success of entrepreneurs, which we do as well. And just lastly, reviewing the literature related to earnings and gender, research has found that the earning wage differential does persist in the self-employment sector. Self-employed males tend to be older and more experienced and work more hours compared to wage earning males, and therefore they tend to have higher incomes compared to wage earning males. And on the other hand, self-employed females were tending to be married with young children and work less throughout the year. So self-employed females tend to have lower earnings than wage earning females. So the differential is actually larger in the self-employed sector. In the wage earning sector, it tends to be about 22%. So males would earn approximately 22% higher income than females. In the self-employment sector, the difference is over 60%. So it's larger, definitely. As well, lastly, there are several studies that find that females are significantly less likely to cite pecuniary reasons or money-related reasons for choosing entrepreneurship. They tend to choose that based on reasons related to quality of life. For example, handling home and family responsibilities, and that flexibility is important for females. So we'll go into the methodology we use for this study. We defined an entrepreneur as someone who is self-employed and obtains income through either business or commission-related activities. In other words, providing a good or a service. Professional entrepreneurs were excluded from our analysis. So these people obtain a professional credential and work in a field where self-employment is the natural manner of participation in the labor market. So an example would be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant who starts a private practice. Those people were found to be fundamentally different from entrepreneurs who are required to innovate and develop a brand new business. So those were excluded from our study. As well, we looked at two different types of regressions. A logistic regression was used to look at the demographic and academic characteristics that may lead to higher odds or higher propensity for self-employment. As well, we looked at a linear regression, which investigated how those characteristics impact entrepreneurial income of recent Canadian graduates. So the dependent variable that we used in the study was the maximum annual gross entrepreneurial self-employment earnings reported to the Canada Revenue Agency between 2009 and 2017. As well, we did sensitivity analysis just to determine whether defining that variable differently would lead to drastically different results. So instead of the maximum, we tried the average and the median gross earnings. As well, we did separate regressions for each of the 9 graduate cohorts in the study, just to determine whether there are trends that impact more recent graduates differently than those who have more years of labor market experience. As well, we separated the business and commission self-employment categories to see if there was trends within those categories as well. So the data we used is from the Education and Labor Market Longitudinal Platform, which was released in late 2018. And we linked 2 data sets together within the platform. So we linked the post-secondary student information system, which includes data for all Canadian public universities and colleges. And it lists credentials, demographic, and academic program information for students. And with that, we linked it to the T1 family file from the Canada Revenue Agency, which is an anonymous database of several different tax forms. And it includes income, demographic, employment, and geographic data for tax filers. And as well, I mentioned, it also contains information about unincorporated business income that is reported on personal income taxes. So only that unincorporated business income. So we had just under 1.7 million recent graduates with matched tax information. And of that, approximately 8% reported self-employment income at least 1 year since they graduated. And we further narrowed that study to include only graduates who earned the majority of their income from self-employment in either the business or commission categories. And that resulted in a final study population of just under 50,000 entrepreneurs. So just quickly looking at what the demographic characteristics of the entrepreneurs in our sample, the majority were in a couple family composition with children, and very few were identified as lone parents. It was rare for an entrepreneur to report having a disability. As well, it was interesting that the sample contained more female entrepreneurs compared to males. However, this is actually a lower proportion than the amount of females among all recent graduates. So therefore, females were slightly underrepresented in our sample. Most entrepreneurs were found to have an undergraduate degree as their highest credential, while 20% had attained a graduate, or also known as a master's degree, and 2% had earned a PhD. Only 19% of entrepreneurs had credential in a STEM-related field, so science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. And entrepreneurs were more likely to have studied social studies or law, business administration, or visual art. Before we jump into results, just quickly the process that we used, because we had a large sample, to avoid overfitting the regression model and making sure that our results were applicable to other data sets. The final data set was randomly partitioned into a training and validation data sets. So we used the training data set to develop the model and determine the final list of variables. And that model was then applied to the validation data set, which produced the final results. So in our final logistic regression model, the variables were found to be significant, and our model was found to predict entrepreneurship with 68.2% accuracy. And as well for the linear regression model, the model could explain 21.4% of the variation in maximum gross entrepreneurial income. So we'll get into a couple quick results regarding the regression, the logistic regression, sorry. The odds of becoming an entrepreneur decrease as higher credential levels are attained. Males had higher odds of entrepreneurship compared to females. An interesting finding was that graduates who had never been classified as having low income had lower odds of becoming an entrepreneur compared to graduates who had previously been identified as having low income. For every additional year of age, the odds of becoming an entrepreneur increased by approximately 12%. Graduates without children had lower odds of entrepreneurship compared to parents. The highest odds of entrepreneurship were found for graduates in visual and performing arts, communications technology, architecture, engineering, and related fields, and as well as health and education. All individuals with a graduate or a master's level credential showed lower odds of entrepreneurship compared to the reference category of an undergraduate degree in business. However, PhD holders in education as well as visual and performing arts and communications technology showed higher odds for entrepreneurship. And then looking at the linear regression results, we found that the average Canadian graduate's highest level of entrepreneurial self-employment income was just under $40,000. So looking at the top figure 1, you can see the difference between the training and validation data sets were very close, both approximately $40,000. On average, an entrepreneur in our sample earned $21,400 across that time period, and approximately same with the median income. As well, you could see that entrepreneurs in the business category had much higher incomes than the commission category. As well, older graduates earned higher levels of income than more recent graduates. Although more recent graduates had higher rates of income growth, although that slowed after about 5 years since graduation. So looking at figure 2, the rightmost column here, 2017, is the most recent graduate cohort in our sample. So they have had the lowest amount of labor market experience. And then moving to the left, each subsequent cohort has an additional year of experience. You can see their incomes tend to increase, although the increases do tend to slow after about 5 years. Looking at results by gender now, our study confirmed that males did have higher annual incomes compared to female entrepreneurs. Looking at the top figure 3, you see that it's approximately $5,000 for each of the training and validation data sets. On average, male entrepreneurs tended to have $2,882 higher incomes and approximately the same for median incomes. And they also had higher incomes in the business and commission categories as well. Males also earned higher maximum incomes than females for all cohorts of graduates, except for the partial cohort in 2017, where the difference was insignificant. So looking at figure 4, looking again, starting on the right, 2016 graduates would have the lowest number of years of experience, although males still have higher incomes than females. And as we move to the left, you see that the difference tends to actually increase with labor market experience, although it's not a smooth line. A few more quick results related to immigration status. Canadian citizens were found to have higher maximum self-employment incomes than students with student visas or permanent residents. Graduates with a PhD or a postgraduate degree have much higher maximum self-employment income compared to those with an undergraduate degree. But it was interesting to find that the difference between a graduate and an undergraduate degree was not found to be significant. Related to field of study, graduates who studied science, business, law, and health had higher maximum incomes, and graduates who studied arts had lower maximum incomes compared to those who studied the reference category, which we used as education. Social assistance recipients. So those who had never received social assistance benefits had higher maximum incomes compared to those who did not receive those benefits. And the premium for never having received social assistance benefits were larger for the older graduates compared to those who had graduated more recently. Lastly here with age, for every additional year of age, a graduate can expect approximately $2,500 higher maximum income. We found that as age increases, the parameter estimate for age squared was negative, which implies that income grows every year, but the amount of that growth decreases every year. So it goes up, but it goes up by a smaller amount. And as well, only the more recent, therefore likely younger graduates experience this premium. And for those who were in the later cohorts, Age and age squared were found not to be significant indicators of earnings. A quick recap of results. Entrepreneurs who studied health, law, business, and science tended to have higher incomes. Those who studied arts tended to have lower incomes, although those who study arts, especially visual art, were found to actually be more likely to become entrepreneurs, even though they can expect low incomes. We found that entrepreneurial income does increase with age, and income growth slows down after about 5 years post-graduation. Males entrepreneurs' maximum incomes were almost $5,000 higher than their female counterparts, and the difference grew with labor market experience. In addition, entrepreneurial income is not significantly different between undergraduate and graduate degrees. However, our findings show that it does pay to get a PhD, as those graduates enjoy much higher maximum incomes than those with lower credentials. So in conclusion, the study was one of the first to identify fields of study and credential levels that contribute to entrepreneurial propensity and success. And it supports the evidence that higher education is beneficial for entrepreneurs. Our results suggest that governments could encourage and invest in higher education for potential entrepreneurs, as well as making entrepreneurship a preferred option among those with higher education. With continued improvements in the data and willingness to use and link data in new ways, further research in this area has the potential to uncover effective approaches to prepare students for entrepreneurship, as well as methods or strategies to support existing entrepreneurs. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Megan. That was really good and a really interesting summary of your research. I'm going to see if people have questions that they might put in the question and answer section through Zoom. But while we're seeing if that happens, I thought I might start with a couple of questions. So first, I think a lot of people are interested in using this ELM data, and not everyone has done it, and you have. And so right at the beginning, I noticed that you were able to exclude doctors, lawyers, and accountants from your sample, which would be hard to do. For example, I have done a lot of work with just the tax data, but not put into the ELM platform. So was that a difficult thing to do, to exclude those occupations? Does the occupation data look good in your view?
Well, it wasn't, we didn't exclude it based on their occupation. There's 5 different categories that an entrepreneur can categorize their business, and it's however they see themselves. So one of the 5 categories is professional entrepreneurship. So that would include people who have those private practices. So it wasn't hard to exclude those because it was excluding an entire category of self-employment income. So it wasn't as difficult as you might think.
Sounds as if it was straightforward, which is a real plus for that data.
Yes, absolutely.
So again, not wishing to discourage other questioners, but I will go on. You said that it was 68% accuracy. So accuracy for predicting whether or not someone's an entrepreneur, it's a bit tricky, right? I gathered what you meant by that was that of all the people who are entrepreneurs, your model would have predicted that 68% of them were in fact entrepreneurs. Is that the way we should interpret that number?
Yes, yeah, I think that's accurate. So better than a coin flip, but it's still 68%. So what that would mean is if you were looking at all of the demographic and other indicators in the sample and not knowing first whether they actually are an entrepreneur or not, that the model could have about 68% accuracy. So I think that we're saying the same thing.
But it's possible also that the model predicted some people to be entrepreneurs who were not entrepreneurs, right? That's
right. Yes, it is.
So how you think about that is interesting. The other thing, and maybe this was something that obviously in a rapid presentation you couldn't really expand on very much. You talked about obviously the programs that people had studied in, but then I think you mentioned other credentials, and given that might have such policy importance. I was wondering if you could expand on how you were able to identify that in the data and how that worked out.
Sure. That was a little bit more difficult because what that required was the PISA data, the post-secondary information we have is actually, it's a listing of credentials as well as programs in progress. So in order to, we had to create cohorts for each graduating year. And then we had to develop a strategy to identify what was the highest level of educational attainment. So if someone finished, you know, a master's degree and a PhD in the same year, for example, we would want to categorize them as a PhD holder. And Statistics Canada actually developed a methodology, and it's a 4-step process to identify. So it's an automated kind of formula-driven approach where if you know, if the credential type is higher, then one is kept over the other. And one of the last steps is that if a graduate graduates with an education-related credential, it's assumed that they would use that in the labor market. And then at the end, if there was no way to kind of classify which credential to use and which one was higher than the other, one is chosen at random. So we followed the Statistics Canada methodology, and they have had other reports that use that same methodology.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're able to do that. So I see we have do have a question in the chat. It's a very interesting study. The person comments, why focus on recent graduates only? Why not include graduates from a longer time period, long ago?
Good question, and I definitely would have. It's just that the data available was only since 2009. So we had full 2009 to August 2017 information available at the time. I think there's probably been more recent data added since this study was undertaken, but it was just related to data availability is why we went back to 2009.
So thank you very much, Megan, and thank you very much, Eman, for sharing this research for us and for your contribution to the journal. And you know, I should point out that, of course, this is work that's also been done at a research data center. So it's this collaboration between the Canadian Research Data Center Network and the journal Canadian Public Policy, Analyse de Politiques. In that same vein, and was published in, as I said, the September 2022 issue. In that same vein, another paper from the September 2022 issue is by Pierre Fortin. And Pierre is an emeritus professor of economics at Université du Québec et Montréal. And he is going to speak today on CEGEPs and on his joint work with Natalia Bissiglia and Jimmy Roy. And please go ahead, Pierre.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Perry, for organizing this event. First thing first, my others and I are very grateful to the UQAM INRS Research Data Center for their technical support, and also to Canadian Public Policy, its editor, Mike Vail, and 3 very competent referees for their scholarly support in this endeavor. And we also got so much help from our friends, as the Beatle would say. Now, the institution we have studied, the CEGEP, is a specific, is a Quebec-specific post-secondary institution that was created by an act of provincial parliament in 1967. Entry is right after graduation from secondary school at the end of grade 11, not 12, 11. A 2-year pre-university CEGEP diploma is mandatory for all students who intend to go on to university. The time it takes to get a BA degree is 16 years in school. It is the same as elsewhere in Canada, but the sequence is more gradual. Making space for CEGEP entailed shortening the BA to 3 years of study instead of 4. CEGEPs also offer 3-year career programs to those taking a shorter route to the workplace, with access to university then allowed under reasonable conditions.
Sorry,
Additional
Pierre, to interrupt
features
you. I'm just having a little bit of trouble sharing the slides. So I'm asking my my colleague Ryan to share on his end. I'm not able to move the slides on my end. So just sorry to interrupt. 1 second.
Okay, can you put slide 2? What should I do now?
We'll just wait for a minute while we believe we can get that slide up shortly.
Sorry, yes.
Okay.
So Ryan is receiving your slides right now, and he's going to try to share on his end. It's just I cannot move the slide on my end for some reason.
The slides just stalled. So while we're waiting, Pierre, I will just say there's something very unique about your paper in Canadian public policy because it's published in both languages. So if somebody here would prefer to access that paper in French, it is available there as well.
This has been already highly appreciated by the CEOs of the Quebec CEGEPs, to which I've made a presentation of the results recently. I've also been asked to renew this kind of presentation to a number of other audiences who, of course, have access to the French version. Okay, here we are. Perry, thank you so much.
Please do not hurry, Pierre. We have some time.
Okay, I'm at the last line of this number 2 slide. The additional feature should be mentioned is that students are liberated early from high school fatigue after 11 years instead of 12. There's 0 tuition, no premature specialization, easy modification of program, extensive geographic coverage through the province, and a structure that is common to the English and French sectors of the province. Our paper adopts a long-term Quebec-Ontario comparative perspective. In the first part, we begin by describing the trends in post-secondary enrollment in the 2 provinces. Slide 3. And then 4. Okay, that slide 4 pictures the increase in post-secondary non-university enrollment from 1960 to 2018 in Quebec and Ontario. As expected, the boost in Quebec was initially very strong, given the mandatory passage through the CEGEP for students heading to university. Slide 5, the next one, brings out the surprising fact that the full-time equivalent university enrollment rates of the 2 provinces have been nearly equal on average in the last 30 years, since 1987. Slide 6 explains why. It explains that this has resulted from part-time attendance being twice as large in Quebec as in Ontario. Quebec is the land of part-time university attendance, 69% versus 31% at the bottom. And from the full-time enrollment rate in Quebec averaging only 11% less than in Ontario, despite the 25% cut in the length of the BA program. Therefore, the propensity of CEGEP graduates to attend university, whether part-time or full-time, has been comparatively strong. I mean, this is attendance, not graduation. The next slides, 8 to 10, speak on educational attainment. Okay, slide 8 shows that the percentage of young adults holding any post-secondary credential was 4 points higher in Quebec than in Ontario in 2021. It was 80% versus 76%, whereas it was 8 points lower in 1971, 35 versus 43%. However, the next slide, slide 9, cautions that Quebec's 4-point edge in overall post-secondary attainment in 2021 was the net outcome of a 10-point lead below bachelor level and a 6-point lag at or above bachelor level. Since graduates with lower credentials spend less time in school, Quebec's net 4-point advantage in the overall unweighted counts of credentials is reduced, of course, when credentials are weighted by number of years of schooling. The actual outcome shown in the next slide, slide number 10, is that the average years of schooling of young adults was in fact about the same in Quebec as in Ontario in 2021, namely about 15 years and a half. While at the time of reform in 1971, young Ontarians held an initial advantage of 1.2 years of schooling. Why has completing bachelor's degrees remained significantly lower in Quebec than in Ontario, despite similar full-time equivalent university enrollment rates in the two provinces? In other words, why has the completion of bachelor's degree remain less, even if Quebec has a similar university enrollment rate as in Ontario, full-time equivalent? Preliminary research by University of Montreal colleagues recently emphasized the important role played by the multiplication of short cycle university programs, which has been very important in Quebec, but much less so elsewhere in the country. In 2018, for example, 42% of undergraduate credentials granted by Quebec universities were for short duration certificates or attestations, but only 2% by Ontario universities. We argue that this notable difference between the two provinces, we have many arguments on that, is not due to the existence of CEGEPs, but possibly to demographic and financial pressure. At any rate, this should certainly be further investigated. The next slide, slide 12, begins the second part of our paper. We apply a simple difference in difference methodology to microdata from the large 20% sample of the 2021 census. The change in years of schooling from late pre-CEGEP to early post-CEGEP cohorts of Quebec 2001 residents born in the province is compared to the change occurring simultaneously in control cohorts of non-immigrant Ontario residents. 4 Quebec groups are treated: Francophones and Anglophone men and women. They include about 35,000 Francophones, but unfortunately much fewer Anglophones, 2,000, around 2,000, due to the small number of 2,000 Quebec Anglophone residents that were also born in the province around 1950. Slide 13. A priori, the impact of access to CEGEP on years of schooling could be positive, an enhancement effect, or negative, a diversion effect. Our DID estimates for Francophone men and women are positive, important, and precise. Average schooling is estimated to have increased by 6 months. For Anglophone women, the estimated response is of the same order of magnitude as that of Francophones, but somewhat less precise. For Anglophone men, however, it is all over the map. They display a lot of heterogeneity between negative and positive effects. We discussed several potentially confounding factors whose occurrence during treatment may have affected the correct interpretation of the DID effects, including demographics, geography, time to adjust, the Ontario CAT reform, colleges of arts and technology, the reform that took place about the same time as the CEGEP reform, and major institutional changes such as the abolition of the old 8-year-long classical curriculum. This discussion about confounding factors suggests that our estimates generally err on the conservative side. Slide 15 in conclusion. The evidence we present in this paper implies that the CEGEP reform successfully met its intended goal of increasing total years of schooling. Although the CEGEP structure has been episodically criticized for being harmful to university development and to getting a bachelor's degree, and for isolating the province from the standard North American mold, popular support for these institutions in Quebec has been strong and steady over the year. It will no doubt ensure that the institution will stay. The obvious question then is why, if successful in Quebec, the CEGEP innovation has not so far been considered for adoption by other provinces. An important part of the answer has to be political. A shift to a CEGEP structure in any province would require that school boards and universities each agree to cede 1 year of study to create a separate college structure with a 2-year pre-university stream being mandatory for university admission. This would be, of course, a tough political challenge anywhere. For a long while, therefore, our belief is that the Quebec reform will probably remain the outcome of a very hard to repeat historical moment. Thank you very much. Now I'm ready to hear questions, but you have to understand that my hearing capacity is down to 60%. Okay, so please speak slowly and articulately. I trust you, but I don't trust me. And Mike can translate into French if needed, but I hope not.
I don't for sure hope that. Very nice, Pierre, and very, very interesting work. And I will ask for people to put questions in the Q&A in the time we have. I do have a bunch of questions that I can ask you, and I will start with. I don't think it's probably the best first question to ask, but nonetheless, I'm going to go for it. One of the reasons that attracted me to this paper in the first place was that we see a lot of comparative work across labor markets in Canada in various programs in which they compare what's going on in Quebec and Ontario and other provinces. And it struck me when I looked at this that we had to look again at all of that work with this new lens, and perhaps that it was no longer as easy to interpret, because I think we tended to gloss over the CEGEP phenomena. Would that be your view as well?
Yes, although we do have this great Ross Finney at the University of Ottawa, who has done Quebec-specific research on participation in post-secondary studies. He's the beginner, and he has, I think, Professor Muller in another university also as
Lethbridge, yes,
as a co-author. Okay, but I do agree that for many purposes, just bunching Quebec with other provinces and do the general regression without paying specific attention. For example, I was thinking about Eman's and Megan's paper. It is very interesting to understand that very large numbers a very large number of graduates from university, Quebec undergraduate studies in Quebec universities don't have a baccalaureate, but they have certificates or attestations. It's 40 to 45% of all undergraduate credentials that are. So maybe the fact that maybe the origin from the CEGEP and plus certificate it has a different impact on entrepreneurship in that province. It's just an example. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it's very clear that. Well, you also have the same kind of problems when I see all those regressions throughout the 25 richest OECD countries done by a large number of people without taking into account very specific differences between countries that can explain a lot more than this general regression that says, well, taxes have an effect or not on GDP, or whether the educational level has an effect or not on GDP and all that. And they just run this general regression without taking account the country specifics. So I fully agree that we would be waiting for more studies following what Ross and Professor Muller have done in Canada. I'm sorry for the length of the sentence.
I see Eman on our screen, and I don't know if she would like to say anything about whether Quebec should be treated differently in this sort of work. So I'm just asking Eman.
Not necessarily, but perhaps there could be some variables, not necessarily only dummy variables for Quebec, which is a standard thing that many studies do, but use a certain number of characteristics. For example, the possibility for a college student in British Columbia and Alberta to go from a 2-year college, then to UBC or Simon Fraser to finish the BA. You have that in Quebec with this 2-year CEGEP going on. So maybe there's some variables that could pick up both the Alberta, BC, and also the Quebec effect. So not necessarily always looking on at Quebec separately, but trying to ask whether there would be some particular variable that could singularize the Quebec experience. There's a very general point to make here about policy analysis and policy developments. We are a federation. Canada is a federation, not a unitary state. And so we have the great opportunity to have provinces in charge of various aspects of public life, and therefore to be innovators in a sense in those areas, like what happened in Saskatchewan in the 1950s when the healthcare sector was developed in the public sector, or in Quebec where the low-fee universal childcare system was developed in the late 1990s, or where the CEGEP experiment was done. I mean, in a federation, you're likely to have more public sector innovation than in unitary states, and therefore it would be certainly a good thing to follow your advice to try to analyze that specifically.
So just a moment, Pierre. I'm going to ask Eman. I think Professor Almehdawe might have something to say here. So please go ahead.
I think it's worth investigating to look into different provinces and assign a variable for the province, because as Pierre mentioned, the policies are different. So it is worth investigating. I'm not sure what we will end up with, but I think that's a good point. If we have a large data set that can handle, we can get into a large data set that we can include and differentiate between the different provinces. I think that's a future research that would be interesting to look at and see why and the different policies and their effect on like educational attainment and other factors. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to the chat now. There are the question and answers. There's a question here for Pierre. What do you think has been the impact of international students on the attainment ratios between provinces? How have they affected Ontario and Quebec differently? So the key question is, how do international students fit into this analysis, do you think, Pierre?
In the last 60 years or in the last?
I think during the CEGEP period, in a way that might affect the interpretation of your results, I think is the implication.
Let me think. I think that could show up in our difference in difference analysis of which is separated in 4 groups, which Anglophone men and women and Francophone men and women, and there could be an effect of international students, but international student, the groups that are analyzed are not international students. The groups that are analyzed are residents of Quebec in 2001 who were born in Quebec around 1950. So they are really not international students. But to what extent do international students have an effect on the Quebec system? Today, it's one of the most discussed about question in the province, especially, of course, from a financial point of view, in which universities can charge whatever tuition fee they want to international students, and therefore, since the Anglophone university, like McGill and Concordia, have an international basin of international students, which is much larger than the French language basin, international basin, they get huge numbers of international students, and to an extent that even if they have 25% of total student bodies in university, in McGill and Concordia, they grab almost 50% of all tuition fees accruing to universities in the province. So this is a very very sharply discussed issue at this time. But of course, I'm going far away from the basic intent of the question.
Yeah. I think it says on my screen, I think that Perry may have something that she would like to add. Is that right, Perry?
I don't have my hand raised.
Okay, so I guess maybe that's just the indication that I probably should be winding up. I would like to thank Pierre very much for sharing his research with us. It is in the journal, and I just want to make sure that I again note his co-authors, Natalia, Mishagina, and Jimmy Royer. And that paper is published in both English and French in the September 2022 issue of Canadian Public Policy Analyse de Politiques. And as well, thanks again to Eman, Almehdawe, and Megan Salter for sharing their research with us as well earlier. And it again is published in the September 2022 issue of Canadian Public Policy Analyse de Politiques. So thank you very much, both of you. And again, people who have questions about this research that occurs to them subsequently can always either contact these authors directly, or they can contact us and we will relay those questions to the authors. Thank you very much. And Perry, do you have anything to add?
No, nothing other than thanking everyone, thanking our speakers and our attendees. The presentations were very interesting and I definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much for participating, and hopefully we'll see you at future events.